Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, the Erich Auerbach Institute for Advanced Studies. Anja, thank you. Martin, Sel, Noah, Max, very useful help. Thank you, Wolfram, for our intellectual partnership and friendship. Thank you for everybody present, especially some of my students that I see here. I'm very happy that you're here today. Before I start, I want to donate my last book to the library here, the Erich Auerbach Institute.
Thank you.
I think it's the first book in Spanish that I see.
Really?
I didn't find any other book in Spanish, so it seems to be the first.
Oh, that was really time to change this. Thank you.
I will read my paper. You can follow it on the screen. So in case of any doubt, you can see it on the screen. And in this talk, I approach contemporary biotechnology from the perspective of a cultural history of anthropocentrism to examine a profound relocation in the relationship between technology and life. The thesis I articulate is that we are witnessing a historic shift in the status of technology. Technology ceases to operate exclusively as a prosthesis or functional supplement to human beings and instead begins to intervene directly in our ontological constitution. I think this is a tremendous transformation. For millions of years, the human species distinguished itself by using tools aimed at compensating for biological deficiencies, expanding capabilities, and modifying the environment. Even when technology penetrated the interior of the body, as in medicine or surgery, it did so in relation to already formed organisms, without altering the criteria for belonging to the species. Today, the convergence of genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and genome editing technologies introduces a novelty, the possibility of deliberately and inheritably rewriting the biological code that structures human life. The notion of self-construction, self-fabrication, acquires a new and problematic meaning. It no longer designates only the ethical or cultural formation of the self. There's the Greek paideia, German Bildung, technologies of the self, as worked by Michel Foucault, but also it includes the technical capacity to intervene in the biological presuppositions of that formation. So let's start with life as self-construction. Let's start with language. The differential attributes in the Western anthropocentric formulation were predominantly situated on the cognitive level, not in the alteration of the human biological mode of being. Contemporary biotechnology introduces a qualitative rather than a quantitative term. Such technology intervenes in the very constitution of living beings as an ontotechnical power. The differential trait no longer resides only in how we know and manipulate the world, but in what kind of entity we human beings can produce at the ontological base of life. While classical anthropocentrism affirmed human exceptionality through the mind, biotechnological anthropocentrism displaces human exceptionalism from reason toward the capacity to produce being. And this is the difference from artificial intelligence, is that artificial intelligence challenges human cognitive centrality and not mode of being at the biological level. one of the fundamental reasons for our intelligence would be language. For Martin Loeches, it is the great difference. Linking a signifier with a signified would be a singular capacity of the human brain. We link the signifier to the signified with great ease and in large quantities. Human language would be unique due to its apparently limitless syntactic combinatorial capacity, a capacity for creativity unparalleled in the animal kingdom. Only humans would possess this exceptional type of syntax. Language is simultaneously a symbolic faculty, a cognitive technology, and a device for narrative self-construction. Specialists from various disciplines agree that language is one of the specific characteristics of the human condition. We are the only animals that speak. This is debatable, of course, and I think Henriette will discuss this. There's a large literature on this topic, but I believe that humans are the only animals that speak, at least in our sense. No? Human language shares many features with animal communication systems, but exceeds them. A singular characteristic of human language is its double articulation. Linguistic expressions can refer both to the real and to the imagined. We can transmit thoughts and things invisible to the senses. The combination of real and fictional language provides a versatile communication tool. Human language allows the transmission of information about imagined things and entities, not confirmed by sight, touch, or taste, which nevertheless creates solid social bonds and generate the pursuit of common objectives. The capacity to speak about fiction would be a peculiar characteristic of sapiens language. Through language, the human being creates imagined realities, does not consider itself responsible for their creation, and subordinates itself to what is imagined, which appears as independent of its will. In other words, we are novelists of ourselves. If we are novelists of ourselves, it is largely due to language. Of course, I take the metaphor novelist of ourselves from the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset in his essay Meditation on Technique, 1939. In his pioneering essay, Ortega referred to over nature, sobre naturaleza, as our natural state and defined human beings as ontological centaurs, part nature and part extra nature. The term over nature, sobre naturaleza, I doubted how to translate it, because supernature could be another translation, but it's too Nietzschean. So over nature, I thought it was better in that sense. It's sobre naturaleza in Spanish. Ortega recognized that technology was the promising new horizon and invited us to adopt a critical attitude toward technical development. We must think about technology not only in terms of efficiency, but also in terms of its impact on the configuration and meaning of life. In recent decades, Ortega's essay has been revisited by Spanish and Latin American thinkers and has been considered a fundamental contribution to the philosophy of technology. Now we move to our second part, philosophy and technology. Now we take an old dialogue by Plato. There is a magnificent philosophical account of technology in ancient Greece. I refer to Plato's dialogue Protagoras, particularly the myth of Prometheus. in which the sophist Protagoras narrates the origins of civilization. Protagoras describes the origins of civil society and the acquisition of social virtues. Zeus and Prometheus had to protect the human being from the severity of nature, from the violence of other animals, and from their own violent conduct. Here we stand before a classification system of anthropological roots that distinguishes gods, humans, non-human animals, and environments, attributing differential characteristics to each mode of existence. And the mythical beginning of humanization, in which we acquired the characteristics of the human being as a species, is not gratifying, since we are defenseless animals. The human being is originally a being of deficiency. As unfinished animals, we resort to technology as a prosthesis. I understand by prosthetic technology a form of technical mediation that compensates for a biological or functional vulnerability of the human being without altering the ontological criteria that define what counts as human. This has a long history, especially in the philosophical anthropology in Germany in the late 19th century and 20th century. It's going to be an important issue, the idea of humans as deficient animals. What tool is offered to human beings to counterbalance their lack of resources? Prometheus steals fire, and the technique of its use from Hephaestus and Athena, and gives it to man. In a first stage, man acquires a technical knowledge, an instrumental dominion over nature that allows him to manipulate the environment. One of the strokes of genius in the myth of Prometheus is having selected the power of fire, which provides an enormous amount of exogenous energy to the human being. If the human being is a special creature, unique in the world, and this we can also discuss, it's debatable, this is due to the utilization of exogenous energy resources, those forces outside of our body. Other animals lack this ability to use exogenous energy for effects that surpass survival. This separates us from animality and connects us with the formation of a worldview. Since antiquity, the human being has considered itself distinct from other animals due to its participation in the divine domain and its capacity for mediation between the horizontal and the vertical. Although the control of fire becomes a necessary knowledge for nutrition, and religion and language contribute to the civilizing process, such a prosthetic conception of technology proved insufficient in the struggle against wild beasts, while humans roam in geographic dispersion and permanent settlements do not exist. The myth of Prometheus is oriented towards highlighting the indispensable character of coexistence in the city for human existence and well-being. The greatest threat to human survival lies in the absence of the art of politics, to which the art of war and punishment belong. With this, another fundamental element is added: political technology. Protagoras makes clear that without political technology, without the active participation of the citizens in the polis, technology lacks organizing power. And now we move to our third section, biotechnology. And I'll start with humiliations. In his article, A Difficulty in the Path of Psychoanalysis, 1917, Sigmund Freud posed the thesis of the damage that modern scientific information produced to our cognitive immune shields. Such scientific enlightenment, heliocentrism, that is cosmology, Darwinism, is biology, and psychoanalysis, that is psychology, would have generated 3 scars on human narcissism. Peter Sloterdijk mentions other subsequent invasive information that pierces the narcissistic shield and damages our mental immunity. Our resistant anthropocentrism would be humiliated by human ethology, by evolutionary epistemology, by sociobiology, and by computers. And the German philosopher adds that we will still have to endure 2 shames: ecological humiliation and the neurobiological humiliation, which will emerge from the alliance between genetics, bionics, and robotics. According to Sloterdijk, the medical factor played a powerful role in the beginning of the process of humiliation, something that Freud did not point out. As a matter of fact, the same year as the publication of Nicholas Copernicus' seminal book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, you can see it's the first time that scientifically the sun is at the center and the earth moves around, so we lose our centrality, no? In terms of this idea of the universe. That same year of the publication of Copernicus' seminal book, the monumental book by Andreas Vesalius, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, was also published. Both in 1543, they reflected on a process of explication that encompasses the distant stars in the interiority of the human body. These scientific movements developed along the process of occidentalizing. The violent conquest of the New World, understood today as the first phase of globalization, is underway, confirming Walter Benjamin's statement that every document of civilization is at the same time a document of barbarism. Symptomatically, the corpses for medical investigation are from criminals condemned to death. These are some of the images of the scientists. I'm very interested in this one, but let's move and show the pictures first. Amazing drawings of the book by Vesalius, very Shakespearean images. There is, the brain, and of course Rembrandt also, and a lot of artistic representations of this section. Let's go back to this one. This is the front cover of the book. It indicates a new epistemology of the body. Public anatomy has become public. Once a year they had these meetings. There is a primacy of direct observation. No? We go from textual authority to evidence and empirical seeing. And the body becomes an object of scientific knowledge. Of course, this is not automatic, immediate. People are still reading books from for a long time ago. But there's a transformation here, and here's Vesalius showing the interior of the body. The interest in anatomy deployed during the Renaissance continued with intensity in the following centuries. One manifestation of such attraction is noted in the collection of wax figures from the Imperial Museum of Physics and Natural History in Florence. The Zero Plastic Workshop, known as La Specola for its astronomical observatory, open until the second half of the 19th century. For a single wax figure, more than 200 body parts from cadavers were used. Since there were no preservation methods or refrigerated chambers for conservation. Among the objectives of the anatomical pieces was to present three-dimensional figures for didactic use without the need to resort to direct examination of cadavers. The sculptures are so similar to human beings, so minutely realistic, that they seem to suggest this expression, the phantom of the flesh. The imitation of the human body at La Specola combines science and art. In the figures, corporeal fidelity acquires an astonishing dimension. Such an uncanny effect was due in part to the ambiguity between life, sleep, and death. What would happen if one of those figures woke up alive? And in this La Specola, we can move. Amazing realistic, hyper-realistic representation. Yeah. Here the so-called anatomical gaze has become an institution. The body is transformed into a collection, and models replace the corpse. So what would happen if a figure came alive? This is when we encounter Dr. Frankenstein. The creation of life in the laboratory emerges as a primordial element of science fiction in the imaginary of modernity. When in 1818, Mary Shelley, then a young woman of 19, published Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, she could not have imagined the repercussions of her first novel. So famous did her novel become that it is common to identify Frankenstein with the monster and not with the scientist, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Among other things, Frankenstein poses the problem of responsibility of creation without divine intervention. Radical science, a male creator and a male body, a spectacle of deformed masculinity, which in part explains the rejection of the father of his son, the monster. One of the phenomena that captures attention is the structure of the human body and of animals endowed with life. We often ask ourselves where the principle of life comes from. With Dr. Frankenstein, the human being supplants God. It acquires the capacity to confer life upon an animal as complex as man. At stake is the relationship between human beings and machines, which also illuminates the relationship among human beings themselves. We are on our way to a triple creation of body, of consciousness, of lineage. If human beings provoke, it is due to the indetermination. We are the most unpredictable of species. The Renaissance thinker Giovanni Pico della Mirandola synthesized it in the following way in his oration on the dignity of man, when God says to Adam, and I quote, "I have made you neither celestial nor terrestrial, neither mortal nor immortal, so that, as the free and extraordinary shaper of yourself, you may mold yourself in whatever form you prefer. You may degenerate into the lower forms of life, which are animal, or you may be regenerated into the superior forms, which are divine, according to the determination of your spirit." End of quote. And in the 18th century, Jean Jacques Rousseau, in his Discourse on the Origin of Inequality of Men, 1754, proposed the concept of perfectibility to define the human being. While the beast chooses or rejects by instinct, the human being chooses or rejects an act through an act of free will. As free agents, however, humans frequently depart from the rule to their own detriment. Note that both in the Renaissance Manifesto and in the Enlightenment essay, there sounds like a warning about the possible misuse of freedom. And now we go to our final section, genetic engineering. We thus have two histories. A very long evolutionary history of the universe and of the human being on the one hand, and a very brief history of genetic engineering on the other. In the latter, more recent history, ontological intervention takes place when technology ceases to operate on functions, behaviors, or already formed bodies, and instead intervenes in the very condition of the genetic code. From the process of immunization, sterilization, pasteurization, and artificial insemination of the 19th and the first part of the 20th, we move in the second half to the discovery of the genetic code, transgenesis, and cloning. The signal of the advance in molecular biology that was achieved with the helical model for the DNA molecule presented by Watson and Crick in 1953 had its most visible manifestation 2 decades later with the transfer of a frog gene to a bacterium. In art, of course, we know in 2000, the Brazilian bioartist Eduardo Kac used Alba, the fluorescent rabbit, which is also a big discussion. The optimistic expectations of biotechnology are illustrated by the American geneticist George Church and the philosopher Ed Regis in their book Regenesis, How Synthetic Biology Will Reinvent Nature and Ourselves, 2012. In the author's definition, synthetic biology is the science of selectively altering the genes of organisms so that they do things they would not do in their original and natural state. The panorama approaches utopia. These technologies have the power to improve human and animal health, prolong life expectancy, increase intelligence, and improve memory. It seems that everything depends on technology, that it reigns supreme and independent over human volition. Some critics are very harsh about this prognosis, considering that it belongs to advertising and search for funds, that technological prophetic thought is usually immune to empirical refutation. In part, chance continues to govern, since the technologies themselves are also on an evolutionary trajectory. And since genetic complexity prevents total control, this apparent possibility of collateral damage in all these interventions. Even in this case, chance is not exclusively natural, but technologically mediated. Certainly, there is no lack of bibliography on genetic editing and its influence on the human condition. Already in 2015, the well-respected magazine The Economist had published Editing Humanity, a new technique for manipulating genes holds great promise, but rules are needed to govern its use. You can see the illustration of The Economist in the front cover. Yes, I did not read the magazine. I asked ChatGPT to give me some interpretation of the picture. The image depicts a baby reaching toward letter blocks A, T, G, which symbolize the 4 nucleotides of DNA. Around the child, I have written annotations such as high IQ, no baldness, low risk Alzheimer, breast and stroke, perfect pitch, 20/20 vision, sprinter, perfect baby. 2015, The Economist. And this we can connect. Oh, yeah, go ahead. I know it's a weird leap, but we can connect this with reborn dolls. I don't know if you're familiar with reborn dolls. They are in the artistic marketplace. They are hand painted. They are sold as authentic, safe, and secure. I wonder if they're technopets or what. I want to show 48 seconds of YouTube in Brazil of a meeting.
In Brazil, hyper-realistic reborn baby dolls designed and handcrafted to resemble real infants are growing in popularity, stirring both fascination and controversy. Videos featuring emotional interactions with these dolls have gone viral, with influencers staging scenarios such as simulated births and public outings. While a bill has been passed honoring reborn doll artisans, a lawmaker proposed banning public healthcare services for the dolls following a video of a woman taking one to a hospital. Critics argue that the attention given to the reborn doll community distracts from more pressing societal issues. Proponents defend the practice, citing therapeutic benefits.
Before you think this is too weird, it's very common. And I would say that anthropomorphic objects, they usually create this kind of difficult identification of what's human and what's an object. And we can think in terms of, for example, of robots or sex robot. And it gets really complicated with robots that are, they have a figure of very young women. Robots that are sold as sex robots, and they seem to be 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. And it's a very complicated issue. And our relationship to objects is not that clear if we somehow attribute some feelings to objects. So the process of objectification carried out by 18th century French materialism, let's say La Métrie, and by 19th and 20th century naturalism, leads to genetic engineering, with the well-known cries of alarm, regulations, and prohibitions. Whether or not to modify human genes will be one of the most relevant questions of the 21st century. Evolution has not been completed, but it has been modified. Life is understood as coding systems that allow control and intervention, always materially embodied, which contradicts the notion of simple materialism. Moreover, information-centered conceptions of organisms are necessarily linked to epigenetics, in the sense that behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way genes work. But the process of disenchantment of the world has reached human beings as a natural entity. Understood from the philosophy of technology, biotechnology would be a kind of emergent technical individuation, where the technical object is not exterior to the human, but is ontologically interwoven with the living. Historically, when a technology becomes normalized, its use expands. Once present, it reconfigures social desires and expectations. What counts as a defect to be corrected? What level of technical and moral risk is acceptable? Human beings are not characterized by acting only if we have absolute certainty. we frequently act by trial and error and can commit catastrophic errors that affect generations. Hubris characterizes us. This Greek concept alludes to pride, arrogance, or excess. It represents an excessive pride that leads a person to defy limits, especially divine ones, believing itself superior. Which leads us to biotechnology as a manifestation of the overnature constituted by technology. As Rosi Braidotti says in her book, The Post-Human, the technological apparatus is our new milieu, and such intimacy is much more complex and productive than the prosthetic and mechanical extension that modernity has made of it. A futuristic anthropocentrism has already been carried out. In November 2018, two twin sisters were born, the first designer babies in all history. Biotechnology becomes a rite of passage to the project of production. The biotechnological threshold designates the historical moment in which humanity acquires the technical capacity to intervene in a heritable manner in its own lineage, transforming evolution from a natural process into a techno-political decision. I want to stress this already happened in 2018. It's not in the future. The paradigmatic case is that of Jean Jacques. It is the first attempt to edit embryos to make them resistant to HIV. On this website, he had already pointed out the possibility of editing the human genome, and I quote Jean Jacques, "For billions of years, life has progressed according to Darwin's theory of evolution. Random DNA mutation, selection and reproduction. Today, genome sequences and editing provide new and powerful tools with which to control evolution." End of quote. The Chinese biophysicist announced that he had used CRISPR-Cas9 to edit human embryos with the aim of making them resistant to HIV, modifying the CCR5 gene. Two girls were born, Lulu and Nana. Perhaps there was later a third birth. And Lulu and Nana are not their real names. We don't know anything about, but we know that they were intervened genetically. But the editing was neither safe, nor precise, nor medically necessary. Jean Jacques used immature technology on human beings with weak medical justification, with a lack of transparency and ethical oversight. He deliberately ignored the norms and prohibitions with the intention of producing an improved human being. Germline editing passed from being a theoretical possibility to a realized practice, which opens the door to genetic enhancement. The experiment generated international condemnation. Jean Jacques was fined and punished with 3 years in prison in China. He was released in 2022 and is once again investigating the possibilities of germline editing. He declares that ethics interferes with technological development and compares the case of resistance to germline editing with in vitro fertilization technology, which was initially resisted when the first test tube baby was born in July 25, 1978 in the United Kingdom, and later received the Nobel Prize in 2010. So, final remarks. In traversing this itinerary from the myth of Prometheus to germ-like genetic editing, we have seen how technology has always accompanied the process of humanization. Today, it accompanies it as a direct intervention upon the living. What characterizes the present is not simply an increase in technical power, but a displacement of the place where that power is exercised. Technology is no longer limited to transforming the world or the human body, but is directed at heredity and lineage. Germline genetic editing marks a historical threshold because it converts evolution, until now a blind and contingent process, into a field of techno-political decision. Humanity ceases to be exclusively born to become, at least in part, fabricated. Faced with this scenario, the decisive question is not whether technology should advance or stop, but what we want to preserve when we say human. Our identity is based on our being a concrete biological species with shared DNA, a relatively stable body, an evolutionary molded psychology, a life traversed by natural limits, vulnerability, illness, death. What makes us human is shared fragility and the bond of care. An excessive focus on technology generates technological reductionism. A great part of humanity does not have access to genetic technology, so we must take into consideration the issue of inequality. Moreover, we should not underestimate the disconnection between technology and politics. Political negotiation is always necessary to regulate scientific advances, and technological optimism must confront social reality. The convergence between biotechnology, neurotechnology, and biodigital interfaces confronts us with a scenario without historical precedent, in which technology ceases to be only a response to deficiency to become a design of being. However, Plato's Protagoras reminds us 2,500 years later that no technology is politically neutral and that human survival does not depend only on the mastery of fire, but on the capacity of collective negotiation. In the uncertain terrain, in the uncertain technical landscape of the third millennium, the decisive question will not only be what we can do with life, but whether we will be capable of deliberating as a community about the forms of life we are willing to produce and to inherit.